What brought us to TPSG initially? I think it was maybe because we were looking at posted hospitals and there was a feline hospital kind of around the area where we are that was for sale, and they were the people who were selling it. So I think that's why we originally reached out to them. And then that's when we met, Carl and Rex. I will say that from beginning to end of acquisition, I mean, they were there to answer any questions that we had. They were there to kind of be the go-between like us and the sellers, which was, kind of nice to have that knowledgeable buffer because this was, our first acquisition that we did at that time. So we, didn't totally know all the ins and outs of what that should all look like and behave like. And I think they were also very upfront with us when they felt like things were maybe not like quite feeling right as far as, moving forward, as far as just like what the seller's reactions were to different questions or requests or anything like that. They were, kind of open and honest saying like, hey, this, maybe this isn't actually the right fit. Like I can see you guys are getting frustrated and, we're not getting the answers that we're looking for. So they were, I would say, hugely pivotal in the entire like the first hospital that we didn't buy, and then obviously the one that we did buy. When we came across Meadows, there were some things, there's always going to be things, right, between buyers and sellers that you might not totally agree on.
Right.
And so, it was again getting to this point where it was like, it's great to have TPSG to kind of go back and forth and, talk to their people and, do all of that. But maybe we're at a point where we just all need to like sit around a table and talk to each other. And so they facilitated that as well so that we could get like buyer, seller, both representing agencies, like everybody just together to like kind of clear the air and like make sure that questions were answered and we had like a plan moving forward. It was kind of a weird acquisition because at the time I was pregnant, right? So the plan was to buy the hospital and close in the hospital in September, but then I was having my baby in December. And so we needed the previous owner to stay on and work because he was the only one. And I wasn't going to actually start working in the hospital until the following February. So there was like a time frame of, 5 months ish that he was going to stay on as our employee essentially. So there was just a lot of stuff to kind of work through. And so TPSG also facilitated that like in-person meeting to be able to work through everything and get everybody on the same page rather than just constantly going back and forth through different parties. So yes, it was a natural fit. No, we did not look at other brokers. I think we built a lot of trust in that initial, acquisition time. And so, we trusted their opinions, on everything really, including, timing to sell. And then I think too, particularly with Rex, because over the course of like maybe like a 5 to 6 month time frame before we opted to sell, um, we were kind of in contact with him, just saying, hey, again, like what are things looking like right now on the market? Like, is it a good time to consider selling? Kind of here's why we're thinking about selling and, does this seem reasonable and that kind of thing. We had also been approached. So even before we actually committed to working with TPSG on moving forward, we had been approached by one of the corporations. And finally, after many, I mean, we have been approached by many of them, right? But like finally we were like, okay, sure, we'll like share some numbers with you. Like, let's get down to like what you're thinking you'd offer us and like what that would look like. And at that point, it wasn't like, I'm not gonna say it wasn't serious because we had kind of decided like maybe it is really time to sell. But it wasn't serious enough that we had someone representing our side. So we kind of went through all of that and then got, kind of their offer and reached out to Rex. And we were like, so here is what's happening. Like, we, decided, sure, let's talk to these people. And like, this is what they have as an offer. What do you think about this? And he was like, I think you could do better. And then that's where we kind of were like, okay, like we kind of had that feeling too. Um, just based on conversations that we've had with you guys. So like, can we work with you to like, kind of did like the unofficial, like we didn't like post the hospital. for sale, because our team didn't know at the time that we were even thinking about that, and we didn't want it to go public because we were still a little on the fence about it. And so then they did kind of a behind the scenes, like what corporations might be interested. We were a big enough hospital that like not very likely we would get an individual buyer. Um, so that was kind of how we ended up, back with them. And I think a lot of it was the fact that like again, and this was particularly Rex just because he's the one that we were talking with, between the times. Him being willing to kind of have those conversations with us even when he wasn't even sure that we were going to be booking with him or like working with him, just again kind of built that trust up a little bit because like there wasn't even a known commission coming, and yet you're willing to take the time to have a conversation and like give us some guidance and that kind of thing. Definitely talk to a broker and see if it seems reasonable. And it's hard, I guess, if you don't have someone that you already trust, to know who to reach out to. But I think that, these guys, TPSG, even if they haven't worked with you before, can at least give you an idea of, whether or not they think that that's a reasonable offer, or if you really could be in a better place than that. Obviously you'd have to share some financials with them for them to be able to like help you out with knowing whether or not it's a reasonable offer. But I think at least touching base and saying, hey, I have this offer someone solicited and I have an offer and I'm just wondering if it seems reasonable or if it seems like maybe it would make sense to work with you guys and see if there's something more that can come out of it. I mean, I think part of it is that they do have so much more knowledge and experience in that arena, right? So like they're not afraid to necessarily call a bluff if they're like, you're not putting a good enough offer up for this hospital. And it means more coming from someone that has that experience and stuff than it does from an individual owner questioning it and being like, because I know even when we had that initial offer, I did push back and I said, hey, this doesn't seem like quite enough. And here are some requests that I would have that really were quite minimal requests in my mind, that like I'm not going to even consider moving forward unless we can like maybe get these things, changed. And it was like almost an immediate like, nope, this is our best offer that we have, we can't make a better offer. And I think that as an individual owner who's trying to sell, that's going to be the response that you get, where if you have someone on your team or whatever on your side that knows the business, knows the people, knows the players involved, and they say that and they're like, hey, it seems like this is a little bit of an undercut here, they're going to take that more seriously, and actually, bring more to the table. And I think because they know that going in, I think they even bring more to the table up front. You do get closer to like what the best offer is going to be. I mean, there can be some tinkering with it over the time, but you get closer to what the best offer is initially rather than, kind of being like haggled. I mean, I think they can't get away with things the way they can with individual sellers for sure. Where I that's where I think, they're kind of bringing their closer to their best game to the table there. They know that there's more protection for that seller, and they probably know that that seller is going to have multiple offers, so like they better bring it to the table if they want that hospital. So I think it's kind of all of those things. I think there's definitely more of a likelihood of just getting that better first offer if you're going with TPSG rather than just individually doing it. And I would say that might, I mean, maybe that wouldn't be as true for an individual buyer as it would be for corporate, but it's probably sort of a little true for an individual buyer too. I mean, we weren't on the like seller side with an individual buyer, but I don't know, it just seems to me that like if you have representation and people who know what they're doing, that you're, no matter who you're selling to, that you're going to have, more guarantees that you're getting like closer to the best offer first thing rather than having to, try to get there and improve the offer. Definitely, and this one is a little bit more even on with Carl specifically because he's also a lawyer. Um, there were several times that we had lawyer related questions, through the process. So that was, really helpful. And I think, let's see, again, having someone who has the history, the experience to be able to have some maybe more pointed conversations with corporate than an individual would necessarily feel comfortable doing. Or even if the individual feels comfortable, I think it could be easier to be dismissed by the corporate if it's coming from an individual rather than someone who's, really in that arena and in that game. So I think those two things for sure, corporates, because they are so large, I think that they just tend to take sellers more seriously if they have someone larger than themselves, working through it with them. So I think, those things are really huge when you're, looking at selling to corporate especially. Yeah, I mean, I think, especially looking at that whole array of, everything we went through with buying and then the conversations between buying and selling and then through the sale, I think the biggest thing for me and for us really was the support that we felt. The fact that we had someone that we could ask questions of, say, hey, is this typical? Because sometimes when we're like, this seems really weird, they're like, no, no, this is fine. Where other times it's like, yeah, no, this is weird. So, just having the support and then having their knowledge of like what is typical and what is normal and like what's okay and what's not okay. All of those things were very helpful because it is a very, personal and emotional experience on both ends of it, both buying and selling. You're putting like your all into it, regardless of which end of that you're on. And so just being able to have that experienced support in your corner and know that like, I can call the cell phone number or I can shoot an email and like I'm gonna, get a response in the next, couple hours or 24 hours, depending on like how urgent or what time of day, is really comforting, when you're going through those kind of foreign territories of first buying and then selling. I will say if I ever choose to buy again, which is highly unlikely, I would reach out to them first. So,
There you go.
I
That's
mean,
great.
if I was ever back in that boat, which I don't think I will be, but if I ever was, they'd still be people that I'd want to reach out to. So, I mean, even at this point, after having gone through a purchase and a sale with them, if anything popped up again, I would not hesitate to reach out to them.